Welcome everyone. Welcome to lesson 3 of the Preces Latin Toolkit. Let's jump right in. Today we're going to be doing verbs. So we're going to be covering verb conjugation in the present tense, and then we're going to talk about the concept of verb tenses and a little bit about what are called voice and mood. So, as always, we start by remembering that Latin is logical, so we can explain it, and that means that anyone can learn Latin. Why have I got a great white shark there? Mainly because I just discovered you can put these fantastic animations into PowerPoint, and I liked the shark, but I guess it kind of fits in with our theme of, great Australian sports stars, in a sense, although of course the great white is not unique to Australia. But let's carry on. Here is definitely a great Australian sports star, and that's Yvonne Goolagong, or Yvonne Cawley, who's one of the greatest Australian women tennis players of all time. Wonderful, wonderful tennis player, and an amazing and wonderful and beautiful person as well. Anyway, we could say something like, the woman hits the ball. But we could also say other things. We could say, I hit the ball, you hit the ball, he, she, or it hits the ball, you, plural, hit the ball, they hit the ball. All sorts of fantastic combinations we could say about hitting balls, right? And we can notice from this that verbs have person. So I can hit the ball, or maybe you are hitting the ball, or Peter or Paul are hitting the ball, right? The person can be singular or plural. I hit the ball, we hit the ball. Remember from pronouns that there's first person, second person, third person. First person is I or we, second person is you or you, third person is he, she, it, or they. And then conjugation. We don't have too much of that in English. We've got rid of it. But you notice that there's a little tiny hint of it. So we say, I hit the ball, you hit the ball, but Paul hits the ball. And that's the only time the verb changes. So we see a little bit of that left, but most of the time it doesn't matter which person or which subject is hitting the ball, the verb stays the same. And so in English, if I need to know who's hitting the ball, I have to specify it, particularly with pronouns. I can't just say hit the ball, I have to say I hit the ball, or you hit the ball. Okay? I need something else other than just the verb to tell me who's doing the action. Okay, we said that. Let's skip right through that useless slide. So how about Latin? Will Latin have something with its verbs similar to how it does with the nouns? Remember, in the nouns, all the case endings change depending on what function the noun is in the sentence, subject, object, etc. Well, you betcha. Latin, of course, changes the endings of its verbs. That's what we mean by conjugation, right? Remember, with nouns it's called declension, and with verbs it's called conjugation. So here is the verb amo, which means I love. Okay, amo is the first person present form of the verb, and amare is the infinitive. Okay, so let's have a look at this table. I love, we love, you all love, he, she, it loves, they love. Okay, first, second, and third singular and plural forms. What happens when we use the Latin verbs? So we can see that there's a stem, which is actually ama, ama, and the endings change. Very similar to the nouns, okay? So here it is, the verbs. Amo, I love. Amas, you love. Actually, it's amas. Amat, he, she, it loves. Amamus, we love. Amatis, you plural love. And amant, they love. Okay? So there is no need in Latin to say ego amo or tu amas, right? It's double information. So the personal pronoun is rarely used when it's a subject, okay? Because you just don't need it. You might use it if you want to emphasize. If I want to say I love, I would say ego amo, right? If I just want to say I love, I'd say amo, right? So te amo, I love you, or amo te. Remember, word order in Latin is pretty flexible, so you can shove those words around in all sorts of combinations. I will need to specify the subject if it's not a personal pronoun, though. So if I want to say the girl loves the boy, I say puella amat puerum. Okay? If I just say amat puerum, you would normally read that as he, she, or it loves the boy, but you wouldn't know who that he, she, or it was. So you have to sort of specify. So puella amat puerum. Well, again, of course, you could put it in a different order. You could say, often you'd say in Latin, puella puerum amat, and have the verb last. You could say amamus Latinam, which means we love Latin. Okay, and notice Latin here. Oops, I've got to make my laser pointer appear. I love the laser pointer function. Latinum is actually an accusative form, right? So amamus, we love, so we is implied, that's the subject, amamos is the verb, and Latinum is the direct object. Now, a word about this concept of the simple versus continuous present. In English, I can say I love, or I can say I'm loving. I could say I love this biscuit. Or I could say, as I eat it, I am loving this biscuit, and they mean slightly different things, but they're both present tense. Well, in Latin, you don't have that distinction. Amo basically does double duty, so it can mean either one depending on the context. Now, unfortunately, just as the nouns have 5 different patterns or declensions of how they can change their endings, so verbs have 4 different conjugations of how they can change their endings. So just to give this guy's site a plug, there's a fellow called Ben Johnson who has a fantastic series of videos and other stuff available called Latin Tutorial for, resources for learning Latin, and he's made that sort of available freely. So I've taken a number of screenshots from some of his videos because he just does it very simply and very nicely. So we're not going to learn any of this or memorize any of this. This is just for us to see the different patterns. So this is the second conjugation. This verb moneo means to sort of warn or to, exhort. Moneo, mones, monate, monemus, monetis, monent. Second conjugation. Traho means, I think, to drag. Traho, trahis, trahit, trahimus, trahitis, trahunt. And then fourth conjugation, audio, which means to hear or to listen. Audio, audis, audit, audimus, auditus, audiunt. Let's leave that all behind and have a look at an example from the Preces, which is what we're interested in mainly. Now, custodit enim dominus omnes diligentes se. Let's just take it on faith that omnes diligentes se means all who love him. Okay, this is from the prayer for the Father, right? We're interested in custodit and dominus. Dominus, we remember from previous videos, means Lord, and it's a second declension masculine noun, and dominus is the nominative form. So dominus must be some kind of subject. So dominus is doing the action, and custodit is a verb. So let's break this up. Well, we said that. Enim just means for or indeed. So dominus, in the nominative case. Then the verb is custodio, or custodire, which means to guard or to watch over. Let's have a look at its conjugation here, the present tense, first, second, third, singular, and then the plural ones. And we look and we can see that custodit is actually the third person singular. So it means he, she, or it guards. And we've actually got a noun here in the nominative case, so being supplied in the same way as puella amo puerum. We've got dominus custodit omnes diligentes se. So this is like the object, okay? The Lord loves what? All who love him. So we can see that we could get rid of dominus and just say custodit omnes diligentes se, but we wouldn't know who was doing the action. It would be he or she or it watches over all who love him. Or I could change it. I could say custodio. I could say custodio omnes diligentes se, and that means I watch over all who love him. So you can see how, hopefully, how it is kind of fitting together here. And that's what this sentence means. For the Lord watches over all who love him. And it's present tense. Okay, a bit more about tenses. Now in English, tense mainly means the time that the action happens in. And we've got the present tense, action happening now, past tense, action in the past, and future, action that will happen sometime in the future. So let's look at some examples here. I could say, I love Fred. Or I could say, I am loving Fred, to emphasize that it's an ongoing thing, you know, me and Fred, right? Or I could say, I have loved Fred. Now you can think of this you can think of that as in two ways. It is a past tense. I've loved Fred in the past, but there's also a sense, in English at least anyway, where that's considered the perfect present, or the present perfect, right? Which means the action started in the past, but either the action itself or its result continues in the present, right? So I've loved Fred. It's perhaps not the best example. What if I said to my husband, have you put the bins out? And he might say, I have put the bins out. That's the present perfect, because yes, he put them out, 5 minutes ago, but they're still out there on the street waiting to be collected. So that result of that action is continuing in the present. So sometimes the perfect is considered as a present tense, although I think that's a bit dodgy myself. I always think of it as a past tense. But anyway, you'll see why in a minute in the next slide, why I'm making that distinction. I could then say I loved Fred, or I was loving Fred. That's definitely in the past. If I said I was loving Fred, that often means, it's over now. Or I had loved Fred, it's definitely over. But if there's hope for Fred and I will love Fred, or I will have loved Fred. They both happen in the future. All right, so let's look at this chart. We can consider verb tense under two bits, time and aspect. And again, I'm taking this from Ben Johnson's site because he does it in a nice, simple way. So I'm sort of following his way of thinking about it. So continual action is I am loving Fred, and a completed action is I had loved Fred, or I have loved Fred. Action's over. Or I have taken the bins out, that action's over, although, the result continues. So let's have a look at it with loving. I am loving is the present continual tense. I was loving is the past tense, past continual tense rather. And I will be loving is the future continual tense. But then, if I want to think of it as a completed action, I have loved, sort of present. I had loved, that's definitely in the past. And I will have loved, that's an action in the future, but considered as a completed action, right? So how does Latin do that? Again, of course, it does it with endings, right? So the present tense, we've seen the present tense, it's amo and the other conjugations, okay? Amo, amas, amat, etc. Okay? For the imperfect, which is the name for I was loving, the first person is amabam. And in the future, it's amabo. I have loved, that's called the perfect, that's amavi. I had loved, that's called the pluperfect, amaverum. And I will have loved, amavero. Okay? So, anything that's called perfect is talking about the aspect being completed, a completed aspect, okay? So that's how to sort of think of these tense names. So present, I think, is pretty easy. Future, I think, is pretty easy. Imperfect means so perfect means a completed action. So imperfect means it's not completed, it's ongoing. And so that's the name of the past tense, I was loving, or I was doing whatever the action is. Perfect, whether you think of it as present or sort of immediate past with present consequences, is I have loved, so that's called perfect. Pluperfect is more in the past, more completed, that's I had loved. And then the future perfect is perfect in the future, right? So I hope that makes sense. And we're not going to go through all the conjugations because it's just bewildering. And when we go through the videos of the Preces go to woe, that's when we'll go through each verb in teeth-pulling detail and really get into it. But just for now, to get the concepts, to know that all of these different tenses have different meanings and each has its own set of verb endings or conjugations. For now, let's just look at two examples from the Preces. Quem timebo, okay? The verb here comes from timeo, which means to fear or be afraid. Here's the present conjugation of it, and here's the future conjugation. And so you can see that timebo is the first person singular future, means I will fear, okay? So this means, quem just means whom I will fear, or whom will I fear? That's it. And then let's look at another one. Fecit te Deus quasi patrum regis. So fecit comes from a verb facio, which means to do or to make, right? Here's the present conjugation, facio, facis, facit, etc. Here's the perfect conjugation. So timebo was future. Now we're going to look at an example of the perfect. So the perfect means a bit like I had loved, or I have loved, or he has loved, right? So fecit is third person singular of the perfect, so that means has made in this case, because facio means to make or do. So we'll say God, here we go, Deus, and that is a nominative version. When you look up your charts, you'd see it was nominative. So God has made, fecit, has made, te is you, God has made you, and this just means in the manner of a father or the father of the king. And I'll just end by pointing out here that the use of the perfect in this case shows exactly what we were saying before, that God has made you as the father of the king is an action that started in the past, but its result continues in the present. So God made you as the father of the king in the past, but you are still, Joseph, the father of the king, or as the father of the king in the present, and that's continuing on in the present time. So that's a very good example of the use of the perfect. So it has present implications of something that started in the past. All right, we're nearly done now. What about voice? What's voice? Something to do with John Farnham? No, it's not. Okay. So far we've been talking about the active voice. Okay. There's also a passive voice, right? The boy hits the ball. That's the active voice, right? But the ball was hit by the boy. That's the passive voice. Okay. Preces doesn't have much of this, so the passive voice is basically when the subject essentially has the action done to it. Okay. In this case, active, boy hits. In this case, the ball was hit by the boy, right? One example for now, the future passive. Using our example, it would be the ball will be hit by the boy. That would be the example of a future passive involving ball and boy. But in the Preces, doesn't really talk much about boys hitting ball in the Preces. Let's talk about a real example, omne regnum divisum contra se desolabitur. So desolabitur is a verb. It comes from desolo, meaning to lay waste or to abandon or desert, right? Here's the present conjugation, desolo, desolas, desolat, desolamos, desolatis, desolant. And then here's the indicative future. Okay, and we look down here and we see desolabitur is the third person singular form. So this means every kingdom divided against itself will be abandoned or will be laid waste or will be deserted. So that's an example of the future passive. Okay. How about mood? What is mood? So far, everything we've been talking about is in the indicative mood. So the indicative mood is to do with facts. okay? Something that actually is in reality. So, for example, the boy hits the ball. That's just facts, right? Or every kingdom divided against itself will be deserted. That's a fact. Possibly. But there's two other moods. The first one is the imperative mood, and that involves commands or direct address. So if I say, hit that ball, I'm commanding someone to hit the ball, right? Or the usual one in Catholic land, in the Preces, is pray for us. That's the imperative mood. And you'll often see imperative commands paired together in sentences with nouns that are in the vocative case. Remember the vocative case is the case of direct address. So that's often a bit of a clue if you see a vocative noun that there's going to be an imperative mood verb somewhere. And then the third mood that we want to talk about is the subjunctive, which is a bit crazy for English speakers to get their heads around often, because we tend to deal with subjunctive concepts using words like if and so forth. But the subjunctive mood talks about hypothetical or unreal situations, things that are like possibilities, wishes, hopes, etc. So I will hit the ball is indicative, but if you throw it to me is a subjunctive clause, right? I will hit the ball if you throw it to me, or when my mother comes over, I tidy the house, okay? So these things in the yellow are the subjunctive clauses, and we just join it together in English with the words like if or when or whatever word is appropriate, whatever preposition is appropriate usually. But Latin, yes, you guessed it, there are different verb endings. There's a subjunctive mood, and there's also an imperative mood, okay, with its own special endings. Everything's got a special ending in Latin. So we're going to cover that next time. So I think that's enough for today. Let's do a quick recap. We've covered the conjugation of the present tense and the fact that there's no need to use a pronoun as the subject. Okay? You might need to use a noun, like if you want to say the boy hits the ball, then you need to provide that noun boy, right? But if I wanted to say I hit the ball in Latin, I wouldn't need to use the pronoun I. We've also talked about other tenses and the idea of tense, which covers both time and aspect in Latin. So past, present, future, and then continuing or completed actions. Okay, and anything called perfect is a completed action. Other things are continual, except for the imperfect, which is not really perfect. The word's perfect in there, but it's imperfect, so it's not completed, right? And that's our little table of tenses. Then we've talked about active and passive voices. The boy hits the ball is active. The ball was hit by the boy is passive. And then we've talked about moods, indicative involving facts, imperative involving commands, and subjunctive involving essentially possibilities or sometimes possible consequences and so forth. So that's all for today. Next time we'll do a bit more about the subjunctive and the imperative and some examples, and we'll also talk about the infinitive, participles, gerunds, and a few sundry things. And that's it. Thank you for watching.